Okay, we're going to be moving on to Chapter 5 now, where we spend the next 2 chapters talking about different theories of motivation. And we'll be looking at the different backgrounds and theories and how they're applied to work. We're still in the area of individual behavior and how we can look at helping individuals be more motivated to do their jobs and be more satisfied. The learning objectives for this chapter have to do with first of all, we need to define what motivation is and how we can make it meaningful. We need to look at different theories of motivation, content and process theories, and explain those theories. And then we're going to focus in on one of the theories of equity theory, which explains people's reactions to different reward systems, particularly pay and compensation. We'll also discuss why individuals have different needs and preferences within their needs along their different careers, and we're going to also look at behaviors, actions, and the tasks as part of motivational theory. Managers who are able to understand needs and goals of employees tend to be more effective, and one thing they do is they really look at the individual and realize that there's not one particular type of motivational theory that will apply to all people. Again, this is part of our theme within this course, is to say not one size shoe doesn't fit all, and we're trying to look for what's the best fit for each person. Individuals differ in their desire for reward. Some want money, some want benefits. They differ in how you satisfy those needs in terms of maybe they get time off, maybe they get a new job assignment. They differ in how they view fairness of the rewards, and they differ in their view of how the work environment goes. One thing we need to understand is the key differences in employees. The veterans, which are rapidly retiring from our workforce, were labeled so. They were born between 1922 and 45. They were well known for having a very hard, dedicated work ethic. They knew everything about the organization, and they were very influential, and they would do anything. They would stay overtime. They were just committed and loyal to the company. Things changed a little bit more from the baby boomers, which are characterized by being born between 1946 and 64. They tend to be optimistic. They like healthy lifestyles. They're looking for their own personal gratification. They want to find a fulfilling and rewarding career. Then we move to Generation Xers, which were born from 1965 to 76. They like diversity. They've worked in it. They're more committed to having a balance of work and life, so they don't spend too much time at work. They tend to be more self-reliant. They like to have fun, and they like to dress and act a lot more informally than the previous generations. They also tend to have a little bit more cynicism. They've experienced a lot of different things in life, and they also have an approach to jobs that it's really only a job. There's not that strong commitment that we saw from the veterans and boomers. Then we move into what we call Generation Yers. They were 1977 to 97, and they were the generation that has been very influenced by the internet, and that's playing out a lot in terms of how cross-generational groups are working with each other and how you find motivations. They all have different workplace preferences, but one of the things that we do see a commonality is everybody wants to work for a fair boss. They also want to believe that they're working for a company that has integrity. They do not want to work in a place that is unsafe. They want opportunities to grow and learn. They want flexibility. When they do work, they want to get real and constructive feedback, and they want the reward systems to be fair. Now we're going to move into some of these theories that apply to behavior and performance. And there's different interpretations, and we're going to place some different emphasis on some of the different factors. First of all, when we look at motivation, being goal-oriented is very much a part of it. Also, it results from events and processes that might be internal and external. We're going to be talking about content and process theories. A lot of the research is still evolving around motivation, and there's a lot of things that we don't even know why people tend to get motivated. But being a good manager requires observing what turns people on and what makes them have more desire to perform on the job. Motivation is a result of forces acting on an employee that initiate and direct behavior. Motivated employees like to do the best way on their job. They like to have high-quality products or services. They tend to be more productive. They like to be involved in a high-performing team, collaboratively with their co-workers, and they tend to be a lot more confident and decisive about how they go about doing their job. When we start with motivation, we want to take a look at individuals. And usually when we look at motivation for something, we want to identify a need that is lacking, which would, if we don't, if we're hungry, we have a desire to eat, so we look for breakfast or something. So usually we're looking for a deficiency. If someone wants a challenging job, maybe their job isn't challenging enough, so we look to make it more challenging. Usually we see deficiencies in their motivation around psychological factors, sociological factors, or even physiological factors. When we look at the process, we start with the fact that we already said is that there is a deficiency need. There's something that they're lacking, and they are looking for a way to satisfy that need, and usually they identify it in terms of some sort of goal-directed behavior. And when they do that behavior, there's some sort of performance that's evaluated, and they either get rewarded or punished for that, and then they reassess whether they want to do that behavior again or not, whether it's been rewarded or punished or affirmed or not. We're going to look at two areas of two different types of motivational theories. One has to be content motivational theories, and another is process motivational. When we're talking about content, we're talking about factors internally within a person that energize them and direct them, and they tend to be sort of inferred. When we look at process, we look at how how we go about developing those motivational activities so that the behavior is sustained or else stopped. Content theories suggest that managers look for what employee needs are triggered, how they can offer meaningful rewards, how they can optimize that behavior, and try to also identify patterns that they don't want to repeat in terms of motivation. Process theories tend to look at the idea that there's a process involved and how they make choices on how preferences and rewards, so how they think through something and go about getting that reward. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the theory founders when we look at content theories. Abraham Maslow, many of you may have already heard about his needs theory. Alderfer about existence, relatedness, and growth. Frederick Herzberg and his two-factor theory. And McClelland, who talks about needs for achievement, power, and affiliation. When we're going to explore a little bit about process theories, we're going to talk about Victor Varoom, who really started developing expectancy theory. Adams, who pioneered the area about equity theory, B.F. Skinner, who's well known for reinforcement, and Ach from the University of Maryland, who really did a lot of research on goal setting. And one of the things about content theories, managers need to be aware of differences in individuals around their needs, desires, and goals. And in process theory, managers need to understand the process of motivation. So we have internal versus external type of aspects following around motivational theory. In content theories, one of the most famous, and you'll see it outlined in your book, is Abraham Maslow on needs theory. And he says that it's really a hierarchy that starts with people needing to feel physiologically safe when they have their food and shelter taken care of. Then they can move on to safety and security, that they live in an environment that's safe. Then they want to belong to a group and feel a social involvement, a community. And then they start looking around to do work that gives them a sense of self-esteem. And then lastly, once that need is satisfied, that they're actually looking for some kind of self-actualization where they can do something that has some sort of contribution to society. A person tends to satisfy the basic needs before going to the next level up. So it's usually defined in sort of a hierarchy of needs. Lower level needs need to be satisfied first. And when a need is satisfied, like if you know that you're going to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, you're not going to be worrying about your physiological needs. But if you know that you might lose your job, you might be worried about self-esteem or self-actualization needs. So when we look at Alderfer, he really defines the area of content around existence, and they're a little bit similar to Maslow when they talk about food, air, water, pay. Those are the things that we need to satisfy around just basic existence. Then we have the relatedness, where we want to be involved in groups and teams. And then we have growth, where we want to actually make some sort of contribution or be productive in some way in our job. When you look at the ERG theory, we look at when a need isn't satisfied, what happens. And so this particular chart talks about just sort of shows the importance of growth needs, the importance of relatedness needs and the importance of existence needs and what happens. You either have frustration or you have satisfaction. Now, Herzberg's two-factor theory, when he came along, he kind of took, he divided it out a little bit more so that it didn't just look like I'm satisfied, I'm not satisfied. He said that there's certain things in a job extrinsically that people just basically are satisfied. Things like pay, status, working conditions, that it's a clean, safe environment to work for. And then he said that there's things that actually motivate. It's like having responsibility or recognition or achievement. And these are more known as satisfiers in terms of motivational theories. So when you look at the traditional view of just high satisfaction, low satisfaction, Herzberg actually looked at some of the factors that people say, hey, when I get paid what I want to get paid, I just do my job. They don't usually do extra job. But when you look at the satisfiers, if someone actually has a need for power in terms of their need for motivation, then whether they're paid $100,000 or $1 million, they're really just doing it in terms of a relationship to say, see, I'm paid a lot because I'm valued. So he separated it out by different factors of things that are just satisfying to an employee that really doesn't lead to motivation, and then the things that do lead to a more highly motivated employee. When we look at learned needs theory, this is, we're talking about the fact that people learn based on the culture that they're in. So if I see people behaving a certain way, that's how I learned as a behavior. If I see in the organizational culture, we've talked about organizational culture in the past couple chapters, then I see a certain behavior that gets rewarded. I've learned that seems to be the behavior that's rewarded in this organization, and they call that a learned needs theory. In McClelland, he actually separated out some of the needs theory. In the 60s, he was doing some research, and he said, there's some people who just plain old have a need for achievement. They have a need for affiliation, or they have a need for power. And they actually administer a test called the thematic apperception test. And what happens is people are shown a picture, like there might be someone looking at a desk and somebody leaning over, and then somebody spends about 5 minutes writing about that, and then they analyze it. If someone talks about that, gee, this is a group, and they're having a team, and they're looking at this, and they say this person has a need for social relatedness, or they might say that they're planning something to take over another company. They'll say this person has a need for power. So they use these TAT tests to actually identify these different learned needs. McClelland, he encourages managers to give feedback on performance and point out models of achievement to these employees and works with them to improve their image. And he really introduced more realism into the work-relatedness topic when people started going, yes, there is sort of a need for achievement here. When you compare content theories, Maslow's really looking at identifying basic needs before directing behavior towards higher order needs. Alderfer, who also, he says those who fail to satisfy growth needs become frustrated and they regress and they end up going to lower order needs, which is kind of similar to what Maslow said. You can't really go on to a higher level need until the lower level ones are satisfied. Now, in terms of the content theories, Herzberg's two-factor theory, some job features and characteristics result in motivation, like if you have high pay or you have a challenging job. Others create a comfortable work environment but don't motivate, like just having a safe place to work and getting a reasonable paycheck. McClelland said that there's needs that are learned from the culture that you're in, and that you can train and actually help people develop more perception about their needs. Now, expectancy theory gets a little bit more complicated. Some of the research is still being done in this particular area. And they talk about first-level outcomes and second-level outcomes. And so a person will, if I expect that I'm going to get $1 million for running a marathon, I'm going to go out and probably do that. If I think that they're kidding me, I may not train for it. So the person will select a strength, a desire to achieve a certain level state. The perception of that relationship becomes sort of a first and second level outcome. So if I do this action, am I going to actually get the reward? And that's part of when they start identifying levels. With expectancy theory, most behaviors are under a person's control. And whether I want to go practice running or whether I want to go prepare a report or do a budget. And when employees are faced with a set of first-level outcomes, they select their based on their choices of how strongly they want to perform and what they can do in terms of whether they expect that they're going to achieve that reward for it. The first and second level outcomes, and as we look at terminology, result in certain behaviors. They're associated with doing the job. What happens if first level outcomes are included? It's like, well, people will show up for the job, they'll stay at the job, and they'll do good quality work. When we look at instrumentality, we look at the person's perception that if they do the work, that they're actually going to get the second level outcomes. And those second level outcomes have to do with has a little bit to do with valence, which is the strength of if I'm really thinking that if I really want this, I'm going to work harder for it. So valence has to do with the strength. So if I'm not really caring, if you offer me a new and exciting job and it's not that important to me, I might not do it, or more money or more this, and that's what they're talking about, first and second level outcomes. So when we look at expectancy theory, it's a perceived likelihood that when a person behaves a certain way or acts a certain way, that they're going to actually be rewarded with a particular kind of outcome. There's some subjective probability associated with it because they don't know for certain that this is going to happen. You can review these different principles in the book, but they're really kind of defining further the idea about what valence means, what motivation means, and what performance means in relationship to one another. And here's an example of expectancy theory when they show you the probabilities associated with a certain kind of behavior and whether they're going to be rewarded as a result. Managers should focus on employees' expectations for success. So if they give them a job that's too difficult for them, it's likely that they may not get that, and then they'll be demotivated. When we move on to equity theory, this is a theory that is operating on a continual basis in an organization. And people, this is really an underrated theory quite often. People are constantly comparing, is somebody making more money for the same job I do, or am I having to do more work than somebody else does? But with equity theory, there's a lot of comparison going on in efforts and rewards with those of others in similar work situations. So the important terms in equity theory is the person, for the individual for whom they perceive equity or inequity. They're comparing themselves with somebody else. They're looking at their inputs, like how much work they're doing versus their outcomes versus what they're receiving from the job. When you look at this particular slide, it's broken down a little bit more between the process that a person actually goes through in terms of their inputs, outputs, and comparing that. If they see that there's equity between what they do and the other person, or if they see that there's greater or lesser inequity in terms of what the reward outcomes, then they start modifying their behavior as a result of their perceptions. The way to restore equity is to change the inputs or outcomes from the reference person, change your own inputs. So if I see that somebody's making more money than I do for the same kind of job, I might actually work less. Or if I see that I'm making more money than the other person, I might feel a little guilty and actually might work harder. So there's you might have to look at the situation and make sure that people still perceive it as in terms of an equitable situation in the organization.